Well, it's good to be back together. This week we'll look at 16, 17, and 18. But before we go into that, I guess any follow-up questions from last time? So just one sort of pastoral note I would make from last time, especially because we spoke on the issue of suicide, right? We're looking at the violent, and so the first um, group we come across are those who are violent against themselves. And I kind of hinted at this yesterday, but just to kind of or last time, but just to sort of reemphasize, I think the development and understanding we've had about the nature of suicide and especially of mental illness, right? And the role that that plays, and the extent to which um, mental illness diminishes our freedom, right? Our capacity to make choices. And that's a very, very helpful thing, especially, in our moral tradition, because we have to remember that just because something is a grave matter, right, does not equal mortal sin, right? Mortal sin requires that a grave matter is committed with sufficient knowledge and sufficient freedom, right? And so that we know the thing is wrong and that we have freely chosen the wrong, right? And so I think one of the one of the ways in which we have I think a very healthy development, right, in our understanding, um, is around the way in which those who struggle, particularly with severe mental illness, right, who might have suicidal ideation, right, kind of connected with that, have very much a diminished capacity to choose, right? That is often described. It's like being in a burning building and like they don't want to jump, but they can't stay. Is the image that was often used. And so I think it's something just to have in our mind and heart, and of course to pray for those who struggle with this, but also to pray for those who have taken their own lives, right? And that um, God's mercy is endless, right? And He knows the depths of their heart. But I think also to do that with a certain confidence that God sees, as the readings reminded us week before last, right? We see the appearance, God sees to the heart, right? God knows the full depths of the person. So just a little note there, which I think is important for us to recall. All right, so we're going to wrap up the seventh circle and then go into the eighth circle in these three cantos. And so we'll have one last interaction with the violent against nature, and then we'll move into the eighth circle, which will be in for a while. It's one of the longer stretches of the Inferno, which is the circle related to. Can you grab the door, actually, just because our Kinder are arriving. All right. So the eighth circle, which deals with fraud, right? So there's many, 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 many expressions of fraud that we're going to see. Um, but just to give a little like introduction to what's going on, like culturally, historically at this time, which might help us understand a few things that are happening here in these cantos and a few of the discussions. Um, so in the notes, Esselin points out how Dante is a man um, who was not behind his time, right? But a man who in many ways pined for, like longed for, a golden age, right? That had kind of been before. And this is a tendency that we can see, emerge again and again, especially when we're experiencing like as a society a bad time, which we might have some sympathy with, right, in our own time. That in the midst of that, we can look back to something that's gone before and say, well, wasn't it better when that had happened, right? But what is the important change that's happened? Like, what is the golden era that Dante might be looking back at, and what is the change that's happened that makes him to look back? And the change that's happened, right, is a very rapid economic change that has happened, which is a shift from an agriculture-based economy, right? Sort of agriculture and crafts, so people making things within the space and kind of engaging in trade in that way, to a trade economy. Uh, and this is what makes Italy really, really rich. Because if you look at a map, it's right in the middle of the East and the West. So if you're getting goods from the East, from the Middle East, from the Arab world, right, to Europe, especially into the continent up to Northern Europe, you have to go through Italy. And so this makes Italy a lot of money, and it happens really quick. But one of the things that comes with this is that you have to find um, new ways of engaging in finance, right? Finance kind of emerges because it's not just, okay, you are giving me eggs, I, make leather goods, you give me your eggs, I give you my leather goods, right? But you need money, and then because of the risk that's involved with trade, right, you have lending that goes on, right? And sort of finance becomes much more complicated as a result of that. What also pops up is a new crop of people who are very wealthy, right? So historically, who had the money, right? The land owning nobility, right? So these were the people at the top of the pecking order. They had the land. You worked for them, right? And that was the nobility, right? That was the aristocracy. All of a sudden, you have a merchant class that pops up, people who have made a lot of money in these new endeavors that are suddenly there because of commerce, because of trade. Um, and what you have is a thing that happens again and again. You have the old money, you have the new money, right? You have the old aristocracy, you have the new aristocracy. Um, but I think what is he pining for, right? And what's gone before, like what was good about it before? Um, so if we're shifting from a feudal economy, right? So you live on the land, you work for the Lord, that kind of thing, to a merchant economy. Like what was good about a feudal economy? Um, what is the virtue in it? Is a certain rootedness, right? So you are in a place, right, and you belong to a place. But I think one of the ways that we have to see this is like in its best, right? That there is a relationship that exists between like the aristocracy, the landowning aristocracy, and the people who work for them. And this is, of course, also enforced by a morality, right? That comes about in the church. That they have certain responsibilities to the people who live and who work on their land, right? So the example that I use of this is like Downton Abbey, if you watch that, right? There's this, obviously you have this like stratospherically wealthy family who, have every single thing they need taken care of by all these people. But they also, they own this big estate, and there's people who work on the estate. And there is this sense of noblesse oblige, right? They have an obligation. Their nobility obliges them to care for the people who work on their estate. Now, of course, they are always under, right? They are each in their place, right? And so it's certainly in no sense an egalitarian framework, right? But there is a network of relationships that are there. And what this gets replaced by is things are very much about exchange, right? And so it's not uh, you were born onto this land, you have a certain relationship to the feudal lord who you live under. He has certain responsibilities to you, but it's what can you do for me, and how can you help me to make money, right? And so what we're going to see here is a number of kind of criticisms that are popping up, and as is we're in hell, right? So new sins, right, that are going to pop up because of these changes that are happening in the economy. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Um, all right, so in Canto 16, we encounter three noble Florentines um, who come forward in the sort of strange, locking arms and forming a wheel, right? And roll their way toward Dante. And who are they? They're three prominent men of Florence, right? Of the city. They're also political allies, right? Of Dante. They're also Guelphs, right? That's his political party. But why are they in this circle, the seventh circle? Because they are also people who engaged in the sins of sodomy, right? In some sort of unnatural sexual acts, which are an act of violence against nature. And here, right, you have this dynamic of someone who has a public persona which is very honored, right, very praiseworthy, a noble, public servant who has this secret sin, right? This secret side that's going on there. Not that that would ever happen in our time, right? But so it's interesting though because Dante has a certain respect for them, right? And Virgil actually encourages him to this, right? To a respect to them. It is better that you go to them than they go to you, as he says, right? There's a certain deference that he has for them, which comes across also as a sympathy for them. So he talks about before um, Dante is sympathetic with people who sin like he does, right? So this is one possibility, right? Was there something in his own life, right, which kind of pulled in this direction? But I think more likely, they're people who are his allies, right? They're people who had the same views he did. Again, I think it's a caution on our own time, right, where we can sort of condemn or forgive depending on, what's the particular philosophy or politics of this person or that person, right? So I think that's also a possibility here. Um, and they ask uh, again because he has knowledge that they don't have, right? And this is, as we've seen throughout, this is the currency that Dante can use. This is what he can use to get something out of people or to reward people who he is favorable to. And so, what do they ask? How are things going in Florence, right? Like, well, we've heard, from someone who just came here recently, like things are not going so great, right? And this is where, Dante uses this as the opportunity to say that it is awash in wealth, right? And this new money, right, that has come is wreaking, all sorts of havoc. And what is the upside of this is that courtesy and valor, right? These sort of old-fashioned ideals are no longer there, and it's been replaced by sort of crass wealth. Um, there's a more modern novel, The Leopard, right? Il Gatto Pardo. It's a more modern Italian novel, but it's this same idea, and it's you have this noble Sicilian, prince, and he's a very dubious character in many ways, but he has underneath him this sort of nobility, and then he gets replaced by this like really crass guy who anyway. So that's a whole other side note, but um, so as is often the case, they say, okay, what can you do? Well, remember us when you get back, right? That in being spoken of, that they will live on. So then they have to get from one layer to the next, and so uh, Virgil asked Dante to take his belt, and here it's not so much like a belt like this, but like the belt that I wear at mass, the rope cord, right, that the priest wears, a cincture, which would have been in a religious, a friar would wear this in their habit, or lay people who belong to like a pious fraternity would have had this, and it would have been a symbol of some sort of vow or promise that they made to God, right? Chastity or obedience. So he's taking this from Dante. Dante had used this, right, as he says, as his defense against the leopard, right? Uh, and so he takes this and kind of dangles it to fetch the creature who is going to ferry them into the next lair, Jaren. All right, with that, questions, things that struck you? Wait, hold on.
Actually, in the beginning, I think it's line 4, when he talks about when three shades hastening all together went
Mm-hmm.
off on the sweat of spirit passing by.
Mm-hmm.
Is that just an early reference to these three Florentines?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so it's that basically there's this, squad of sodomites who are going by, and then three of them kind of wheel out from there. Um, and I mean, there's a bunch of things. And again, he doesn't, as we said in 15, he doesn't state straight out, what the sin is. There's all these inferences that are hinting in the direction. Um, and so you have this like mess of men who are entangled together, right? So there's a little bit of an inference there, right? They move in an unnatural way, right? You can't see exactly, where they're going. Your mind can't even comprehend really their motion, how that possibly would work, right? And they're scar and there's
That Virgil, I think, suggests that he should be courteous to these men,
yes.
and I'm missing
Yeah, it's
the why there.
because of their public office. Right. And it actually in this case, some of the commentaries point that um, the courteousness to them, which would be like a deference to them because of their position, actually pours salt in the wound, right? Because what's happened, they're being revealed for what they really had going on, right? And so the courtesy that's poured out on them, in spite of the fact that they're now exposed, right, in this lair, is kind of pouring salt on the wound, right?
Yeah, no, I guess I was confused more than I would have thought. That might have been Dante's response as opposed to Virgil's.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, Virgil might be kind of, uh, you know, Virgil who's always pulling in the direction of what is just, what is true, what you should do, is kind of encouraging. Yeah, keep doing that, right? So Dante's natural inclination, which would be to respect them because they have this honored position, but also they're his political allies, right? Virgil can use that to say, oh yeah, yeah, keep doing that because it's gonna highlight for them, right, the nature of their punishment, right, which is now they're seen as for their seedy side, right, that they had hidden. And the interesting line here, right there, is by now, at the very first line, by now we'd come to where you can hear the tumble of waters rushing into the next ring. So he can already hear the falling waters of the realm of fraud. So it's a little hint that like we're right on the edge, we're getting close to fraud, right? So it's hinting to the sin here is not just a matter of a carnal desire, but is also an element of fraud, right? These are public officials, honored public people who have a seedy side. It's the scandal-ridden politician, right? Is what you have here. It's eternal truths, right?
He's supposed to be this moral
Hmm.
guide, right?
Hmm.
But to do something that's like a sick burn.
Well, it's not. I mean, I think. I mean, you also have to remember. Go back to 15. Like, there's uh, he to Sabronato, right? Like, there's an affection. There's a respect that he has to him, like even in his sin, right? So this was the reminder from last week that like that it's a Christian hell, right? So there's humanity even in hell, right? So I mean, and that's another way you could read it, right? Like, is there you know, the pain is not, he is showing courteousness, right? He is showing respect to them, right? Respect for the office, even if the office holder is, very not deserving of it. Um, but like they experience that as pain in the same way that like when we are far from God, we experience, his love or called conversion as violence, to us. I mean, that might be another way of it is a puzzling uh point here. Yeah.
So it says in the notes that he doesn't put his belt back until in purgatory.
Mhm. Yeah. That is a whole talk that we'll have then. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. That's like an hour's conversation about that. Yes. Cato's a suicide who is in purgatory. So apropos of what we said in the beginning, right? Yeah. All right. So to kind of move from 16 to 17, but first introduce this beast, right? This mythical beast that we have, Jaren, right? So Jaren is the embodiment of fraud, right? The beasts that we meet throughout manifest the sin that they guard or that they ferry you to, right? So Jaren in his composition and the way that he is, just as the centaurs, right, represented that kind of bestial nature of violence, right? Jaren is the manifestation of fraud. So what do you have? You have this beast that comes up out of the water, right? And there's lots of very humorous ways that that's described, right? Like a beaver, right? Who sticks his tail in the water, or like a German who's stepping up at a bar, right? So you only see from here up, and what you see from here up is this very pleasant, right? Very very charming, right? Very seemingly trustworthy guy. But what's below the water, right? What's hidden below the water is a snake, right? Is the tail of a snake. So he like the figure is the manifestation is in a character, in a beast of fraud. Everything looks really good, but there's hidden beneath, right, something sinister, right, something wicked. And so this is now what we're going to be be in for a while, right? So he has this pleasant face, but the body of a serpent and the paws of a lion, right? Um, so um, he has been, as we said before, he's sort of summoned up by this dangling of the cincture, right, which is sort of made into a lasso, and he comes up on the shore. Virgil then goes over to haggle with him, right? There's one other interesting detail here, which is so it's seen both in the description, the physical description of Jaren, and then also this what Virgil does. So it's talking about the his back, right, and is this beautiful design, kind of like a Persian rug, right? And so what the reader is supposed to be drawn to there is to think Arab trader, right? Is and so what you have there, of course, is a certain cultural bias, right, that they would have, against the kind of shifty, untrustworthy, violent, wicked, duplicitous Arab trader, right? Um, and so, what does Virgil go to do? He goes to barter with him, right? As you would with an Arab trader. What is he engaging in? Commerce, trade, right? So all of these things that are making Italy a lot of money, right? Which is we're associating with, with the infidel who brings us the goods, right? But we don't really trust them, right? Because we are not within the same kind of bond of the faith of a shared society, right? So yeah, we engage in trade with them, but we do it always with the level of distrust, right? And of course, we are now going into the realm of fraud, right? And so it's highlighting from the start one of the major points that Dante wants to make, which is that the disintegration of trust, right, destroys a society because the society needs trust to function, right? How can you engage and how can you build up a society together? You need to have some sort of trust of the people that you're doing it with. So here at the beginning, you have this little nod to something that's going to come up again and again. Father Pearson has an interesting note there when he's saying that he's Jaren is a fraudster, right? So he's a user, but how Virgil uses the user, right? So like the user gets used in this. It's an interesting point. All right, so while he's doing that, he says, "Okay, yeah, while I'm doing this, go over there and go talk to those people. Go go interact with those people." Where he goes alone, which is interesting, right? So he doesn't go with Virgil, doesn't go with the guide. And who is that? Those people over there are the usurers, right? Um, Going back to our point in the beginning, one of what makes Florence money is lending an interest, right? The florin. So Florence comes up with becomes the banking house, right, for Italy. To do that, you have to become okay with the moral admonition against lending at interest, right, which was always seen as sinful, right, as abusive. So there's lots of ways that they get around it, right? My favorite is they say, oh no, the interest is a gift that you give to the person who lent to you, right? So it's no, it was freely given, right? It's so there's no moral problem with it, right? It's totally made up. But this makes Florence a lot of money really fast, right? But then, kind of everything goes to pot, right? So so he's go over to the usurers. So much like we had with the avaricious, um, there are no faces or names among the usurers, right? So the idea is it's taking away. It's a sin so base that it's taking away even your identity, right? Even your personhood. But what he does see are symbols, heraldic symbols, coats of arms on the money bags that they have around their neck. So as he describes them, they're animal like. They're like a dog, right? Who kind of is like, picking at fleas, right? And they're focused on these money bags that are around their neck. But of course, as they do, they're having flakes of fire, rained down on them. Because this is still in the realm of violence. Because the idea being that they have committed violence against nature, right? By separating out money from work, right? Money is supposed to come from wealth is supposed to come from the fact that you made something, right? That you created something. And the accusation here is to say they're not making anything, right? And so they're frustrating the design of nature. Work is a way in which we reflect the creator. And so we're supposed to create something, right? Commentators point out that Dante is much harsher on this than like even medievals were on it's like St. Thomas, basically says, well, they are making something insofar as they're covering for risk, right? Risk allows people to do things, so like there is an actual good that is being produced, right, by money lending. Um, but Dante he's much harsher on it. And I think because it's very close to home, right? Like the this is something very, very common to a city. Now there might be a tendency, I mean, we all have this, I think, in our own way, in our own time, right? To say, oh, the problem is, right? And then we have the one societal ill that we blame every societal ill on, right? This is the cause of all of our problems, right? So, there might be a little bit of that going on as well. Um, but the coats of arms are worth noting because they are pointing to noble families, noble Florentine families who are now doing this money lending, right? And so it's saying even these good once noble families, right, who were the bedrock of this society that was based in these modes of belonging and networks of relationship, right? Even they've gotten into this, horrible money lending trade. Um, they've all become banking houses, right? But it builds pretty things, right? So that's why Italy's got a lot of really pretty stuff, right? It's because they had money at the right time, right? So, um, the one interesting note that commentators point to is that uh, Dante does not um, pin this on the Jews, right? So oftentimes the common trope, right, was of money lending was something of the avaricious Jew, right? So it's along with the kind of accusation of deicide, like it was the two roots of anti-Semitism, of like deeply rooted anti-Semitism, was the Jews were the ones lending the money, and the Jews were the ones who killed Christ. So it's interesting that he doesn't do that, right? He doesn't kind of scapegoat the Jews, but points to Christians, right, doing this. Uh, Interesting point. All right, so they having interact with them, right? He climbs aboard Jaron to be carried down, right? Virgil's done the haggling to be carried down to the eighth circle, and as he does, right, it's this very, I mean, it's a more like at a in the sense of the narrative, it's a slightly more interesting moment, right? This sort of exciting moment of he's flying down there and he's nervous, he's going to fall off, right? You have this emergence again of the fear that he has throughout. That Virgil's constantly there to encourage him. Virgil, a number of times here, says to protect him. He says, I'll shield you from his tail, hitting you. Um, and he's holding on. And here, worth noting is the reference to, so he's comparing the flight to different things. He compares it to the flight of Icarus, right? So a classical myth of the sun with wings that were held together with wax. The father says, "Don't fly too close to the sun." He does. The wax melts. He falls and dies, right? So unlike Icarus, Dante follows the advice of the father, right? Dante follows the guide, Virgil, right? And is brought safely to the lair to the next lair. All right. Questions, things that struck you in 17. Doesn't have to be. All right. So, yes.
I think I looked this up on another website. Different couches, like 10 of them are 10 different things.
Yeah. So that's our long slog.
Oh, we're doing that next.
No, that's for a while. So yeah. So the long the pouches. So we'll talk about the next one. Um,
And as we going further into how he has to get outside of himself, like he's mature, he's getting more mature, and he has to trust and outside of himself, he's got to trust in Virgil and God to be by his side.
exactly. Yeah. And that's a key theme here, right? He's the pilgrim, but the pilgrim doesn't go alone, right? The pilgrim goes with another, right? So it's interesting, like to compare this with like our modern notion or like a narrative of the journey, or something, and oftentimes that's like if you were to write a story about like a journey of self-discovery, right? Is that done like under a guide, or is that like, no, I'm gonna leave all the things I know and I'm gonna go out here, right? So like what's the film that was like all the angsty teenage boys liked it at one point? Into the Wild, right? Where like this boy like rejects his family and like I'm gonna go live in the wild, and then he dies because he ate the wrong kind of mushroom or something, right? But this uh I mean, there's a beautiful testimony here to say like, how do I discover myself, right? I need someone to walk with me, right? And someone to kind of show me and help me along the way, right? It's also a beautiful image of the church, right? Of the church as a pilgrim people, right? Um, we'll see that even more in purgatory, but yeah, that's a great, yeah, and the journey changes him, right? As it's just the key point, and so Virgil along the way will note the change that's happening within him for sure.
Is there any particular reason why Virgil didn't want Dante under the negotiation?
It's an interesting question. So the one thought is that he sends him to talk to the usurers by himself, and it's implying like Dante had a familiarity dealing with usurers, right? So it's more of like Virgil doesn't have to go with him, right? So like, okay, I'll take care of this one because you can handle them on your own. Like you have some knowledge of them, which I mean, what that would seem to make sense. Like even just biographically, he would have it would be a group of people he was familiar, dealing with. So that's one possibility. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, because he has any you see like he has a total contempt for them, right? And that could be reflective of his own experience, right? So he writes the Commedia in exile, right? So in financial ruin, kind of dependent on the generosity of others, right? So people um, who are money people, right? He's probably not too fond of, right? Because in what way you know, was he sort of victim to some of these things, or at least to the structures that were set up or whatnot? So that's another possibility. Yes.
That's a more complete example of fraud. And so Virgil is saying you're not ready to trust him yet. And he's like, 'cause since they're like the top layer of fraud, the three,
Yeah, yeah.
they're more mild than the guy who's controlling it all.
Hmm.
Kind of, because he not only protects him there, he protects him on his back.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's like, get in front of me so I can take it.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's the and importantly, Virgil's made the journey before, right? So we got that tidbit already that he's been down to the very pit before. So in the same way that, you go with a friend to a place you've been before, you say, okay, you do this over here. I'll go get the tickets, right? I know how to work the line, or I know how to get the gelato, right? So like, so you do that, right? Yeah, but in that, I think, yeah, to very, very beautifully, you see the fatherhood of Virgil, right? Like you're not ready to deal with the fraudsters, right? Because again, it's also introducing a new sin, and so one of the things that we're going to have to kind of keep in our mind as we're reading all these things is the stuff these people say, right? As you go further, they lie more and more and more, right? And so their testimony cannot be trusted, right? Their words are more suspect, right? Virgil knows that. So it's if you're going to go into negotiations, right? You send the person who's better at it, right? I remember when I when I worked for the Archbishop, we had to get a new like company car, and I think car buying is probably my least favorite activity like on earth. Um, and partially because there's a lot of just like lying involved, right? You know? Being lied to, right? I think. And so I went and I kind of figured out what we were going to do. And so I went back and was talking to our CFO, and he said, "Well, did you get him down on the price?" I said, "Have at it." I said, "I'm not, no, that's like I'm not going to do it." Then it came a couple hours later, tail between his legs in my office. Yeah, I didn't get him down either. Here you go. So, but that could be it too. Yeah, he actually wanted to get there. Right? All right. So yes.
Can you just revisit, for me at least, the sort of visual of Dante on hell? Because there's like descriptions of like the third round of the seventh ring.
Yeah.
And then there's the circle.
Yeah, you need a map, right? Yeah.
Just when we started out, it was sort of simple, like seven.
And it's going to get more
concentric
complicated.
circles.
So that's a really
Missing
good transition.
Or
It's a really good transition to 18, right? So, okay, so far it's been relatively simple because what you have is basically like a series of circles that kind of are creating like a funnel, right, as you go down. When we get to so within those circles, there might be like steps, kind of layers, because, and again, as we said, this isn't arbitrary. It's trying to draw distinctions, right? This is rooted in scholastic theology of philosophy, which loves distinctions, right? So picking things apart in detail to try to understand them better, right? So that's why you have, basically these circles that are, think of, big, lots and lots of people, and then a funnel. It gets smaller and smaller as you go down, right? So you might have some steps or layers between those. The eighth circle, we have a very, very important visual. So imagine like in the center a hole, right? That is the way down to the pit, right? To the depth of hell. But as you're going from the outer part of the eighth circle to that hole at the center, right? The way down, what you have are a series of concentric trenches, right? So imagine like a city is trying to, this is the image that it's trying to evoke. A city is trying to defend itself, and so it digs a series of trenches that soldiers can, wade in, that an attacking army would have to get through each level of trench. So the eighth circle are these 10 trenches, right, that they're going to have to get through to get to the hole to get to the ninth circle, right? Does that
Yeah, no,
visual make sense at all?
maybe I'm just starting with the wrong premise. I thought there were only 7 circles.
Nine.
9.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that helps.
So the these trenches, the word for it is malabulge, right? Which is they didn't take the Italian, they didn't change it out of the Italian, right? So that word means pocket of evil, right? So male, right? Evil, bulge, right? Bulge, like little pockets of evil. And so what you have there, again, the landscape tells you something about the sin. So what is we've already seen the one hint of this already with Jaren. Fraud is you can see something, and then there's a part you can't see, right? There a trench, the people in it are hidden, right? And so fraud always has this hidden aspect. But here's the other really why this image is really helpful. This is kind of Satan's uh, defense system, right? These are the trenches that Satan has to protect himself, right? To protect the most evil, the most wicked. And so fraud is the lying, right? Is the defense system that evil has, right? It's the way that evil protects itself. Is in these pockets of deceit that are there, right? Um, but there are, and he describes this in 18. There's little little ways up from this one to that one, right? And then from this one to that one. So what we're going to go through now are basically they're going, in the same circle, going further and further and further in each of these 10 trenches, 10 malabulge, right? All right, so that was a very good intro to this, right? So the first malabulge that we have um, are the seducers and the panderers, right? So these are people who have committed acts of fraud, acts of deceit related to sex, right? So we see here a pattern emerging, right? What is the least severe of any, as we're going down the journey, are things that are more rooted in the passions, right? So even among deceit, firmly rooted in the will, right? Deception is a much more chosen thing. The people who, use the body as the means of that are the least deceitful of the deceitful, if that makes sense, right? So they separate them out to two different sins, right? Panderers and seducers. So basically, pimps and prostitutes is the two base ways you can say it. And so looking in this first trench, this first of the Malabulge, uh, he sees two streams of people who are being whipped by the demons to keep moving right in the trench, and they're going in opposite directions. And this is historically one of the very interesting notes, right? So this is 22. So Canto 18, line 22. On our right hand, we saw new misery, new torments, and new handlers of the lash. And this first pocket was stuffed full of them. The sinners at the bottom were all nude. Those near approached us, while the far ones went in our direction, but with greater strides. As Romans in the year of Jubilee, for the great hosts of pilgrims on the bridge found a way to move traffic steadily. For on one side, the travelers had to face Castel Sant'Angelo going toward St. Peter's, while those upon the other faced the hill. So here he's referencing the Jubilee year. So this would have been one of the first Jubilee years that happen, and a problem that existed in last year's Jubilee that existed in Dante's time. There's just a lot of people in Rome, right? And so how do you get traffic to go? Well, on the bridge, you're going to have some people going in one direction. You're going to basically make lanes, right? Some people are going to go in one direction. Some people are going to go in the other direction, right? So it's interesting. He's referencing this thing from the Jubilee, which is 700 years later, still a problem, right? So how do you get that many people moving? But the two opposite directions, right, are the two different sins, right? The pimps and prostitutes, panderers and seducers. They're being whipped along. So this is getting to like a image that would be more what we kind of normally associate with hell, right? Of little demons poking people, right? But the image of the whip uh, is supposed to hint toward the seducer uses the body, right, to get someone to do something, right? So, sex can be a very, very powerful incentive, right? So how do you get someone to do something you want them to do and to do it quick, right? Well, from sex, right? So it's a what did they do in life? They use their body, right, as the whip, right, as the way to provoke action. And so what is done to them? What they did, that the lash is used on them, right, to move them. And you have here the two groups, right? So those who use others, right? So you have the the one character, Venedico Caccianemico, who pushes his relative, right, his sister on the Marchese, on a noble, um, to get what he wants, out of him, money, power, influence, right? Uh, and then he says, "Well, I'm not the only Bolognese pimp here, right? There's many, many, many of us, right? So you have a little smack talking on cities, right? Italian cities always hate each other, right? So Dante never misses an opportunity to point out some of those things. Um, and then on the other side, right, you have those who seduced, right? Those who weren't used, but who used themselves and their body to get what they want out of another. All right, last, because this is I think it's one of the more entertaining things that you find in in the Inferno. So going into the second pouch, right? So we got past the first trench. We're into the second trench, and what do you see here? Um, these very sensory experience. So we've already seen some of this in these cantos where it's starting to the smells, right, are terrible, right? It's foul. So this is at 103. Here in the second pouch, we came upon people who whimpered, sniveling, runny-nosed, who slapped and smacked themselves with open palms, right? So they're, the walls were fungus crusted, thick with mold, which rose in vapors from below and clung, making a nauseous brawl with eyes and nose. So hollow was the bottom of this pouch. We had no vantage point to see a soul until we climbed the summit of the arch, right? So they're really sunken into this murky, mire where they are. Uh, and then so there we climbed, and in the trench I saw people plunged deep in just the sort of dung you dump from human privies and latrines. And while I searched the bottom with my eyes, I saw a man, his head so shit besmeared, you couldn't tell if he were lay or priest, right? So they're covered in crap, right? Esalen uses the word shit, right? So, but and here you couldn't tell if he was lay or priest. You could always tell a priest because of the tonsure, right? So priests had the haircut where the top of your hair was all cut off, and you just had this band of hair around here, right? So they're so smeared with crap, right, that you can't even tell, is that a layman or is that a priest, right? Who are these? These are the flatterers, right? The flatterers, people who deceive, right? Who lie by flattery to get what they want from other people. But why this is such I think it's so creative, right? What is a flatterer? It's a BS artist, right? They're full of shit, right? And so what is their punishment, right? They're over the top in it, right? They're literally in deep in it, right? So they piled it on and it's piled on them, right? It's the most creative contrapposto that you have in the commedia, one of them, I think. Um, and so they're full of it, right? And so that's the punishment that they receive for all eternity. Um, the last of these, right? There's a line which is perhaps an examination of conscience for all of us, right? So the last of the flatterers, Thais. Um, so this is at 133. She's Thais. She's the whore whose lover asked, "Have I found lots of favor in your eyes?" Right? And she replied, "And how? You're marvelous. I think our sight, so it's false speech, right? False, oh, how wonderful, how great, right? Why? To get what she wants, right? To get some gain. Um, and then, I think our sites have had their fill of this, right? We're we're up. It's up to here, right? We've had enough of this, right? So even hearing them speak, you don't want it. All right, questions, things that struck you in this layer.
My notes had some commentary about the language that he used for the flatterer.
Mhm.
It seems like he had a particular disdain because he used the Italian equivalent for shit.
Yeah.
That's why Esalen used it, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like his language suddenly gets so much stronger, and the punishment is both comical and extremely severe. It just makes me wonder if he was just sick of, if there was like a situation in his life that he was dealing with, or
Yeah.
it kind of goes in hand with like the used words, like that they would flatter other people too, that you just so over it.
I think if you think about it, like he's a poet, right? So what is his tool? His language. And so what does a flatterer do? Like they misuse language. So this is um, it's like the person who's, anything you're good at, like when you see someone doing it not well, you're like, oh, come on, no, 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 like, why are they doing that? Why are they using it for that way? Um, so I mean that I definitely think is there. One of the criticisms of Esselin's translation, which is the counterfactual is here in this, is that his language is too elevated across the board, right? So he translates everything with this really high language, and scholars say Dante's language sometimes is very elevated and fancy and elegant, right? And other times is very base and foul. And through that, he is showing like he's showing differences in different situations, different sins, different people. And the criticism is like Esselin makes everything seem kind of fancy, right? Um, Here I think you see the counterfactual, right? Which is, I mean, is actually being more faithful to the original, right? Like to use naughty words, right? And we'll see this again later, but
It says Phil, which I
mhm.
don't think quite, it doesn't have the same
Yeah,
feel or ring to it.
yeah, it's true. There's some things in the Bible that are that way too, but that's yeah, it doesn't have the same punch. Be not afraid. Be not afraid. The schedule for Easter week. So yes, I have to be at the Chrism Mass on Monday. So we won't meet next Monday, and then the following Monday I'm on retreat. So we'll take a 2 little week break. So if you're behind, you can get caught up, or you can get ahead, wherever you are. Um, so we'll resume um, you know, 3 weeks hence. Thir 13, right? Because it's 30th and then 6th, so 13. Guess just we have a couple minutes. Just in general, is helpful. Is there anything that would be more helpful or that would be every everyone some different. What's that? What's to put the video on a 5 second delay, you know? Well, it's funny when you post the things on YouTube for the on the parish page, it says, "Is this made for children?" You know, it says it on it. It's always like no, but
This can priest come in, and, you know, do math. And he's starting to talk about the reading. He goes, well, this interpretation of the Bible is completely wrong because what he really said, you know, dung doesn't really get it. It's yeah. Everyone in there are heads that just go.
they put the bulletin down, you know. I oh, let's say. Ask me later.
Note to self.
I had a funeral a couple weeks ago for an absolutely wonderful woman, and her daughters and her son gave some words before mass, and the one daughter said, she said at the beginning of her eulogy, she said, "My mom was a badass," and everyone kind of like did a double take. And at the end of mass, I went over and I hugged her. I said, "Thank you for saying badass. I've never been able to, you know." So, all right. So, like I said, 3 weeks from now. So, we have a Holy Week. Hope to see you all there. And we'll be back on the 16th. So glory be to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Father and Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right. I'm around if you have questions.